I first learned to knit when I was a child, and at the end of a lot of knitting patterns, because I did a lot of my learning from books, because this was before YouTube, a lot of times at the end of a pattern, you see weave in ends to finish. You see that phrase, weave in ends. So when I was young and I would learn to knit, I would arbitrarily take the tails at the end of my work and just sew them in at random to hide them inside the work to finish. Turns out there's a proper technique for weaving in ends, and I'm going to show it to you today. So in front of us here, we have got a little 10 by 10 swatch of stockinette stitch. So it's knit on one side and purled on the other. And right here, I've got my cast on edge, and right here, I've got my bind off edge. And you can see the little tails at either end of the square. So when they say weave in ends, these are the ends they're talking about weaving in. Now, if you try weaving in ends and you hate it with a fiery passion, a neat little trick is to just add fringe to a project and just pretend that those ends are part of the fringe. But that's not always something that you're going to be able to do in knitting, so let me show you how to weave in those tails. I've got two tools here, a crochet hook and a tapestry needle. The crochet hook I picked, you can kind of do any size as long as it works for that piece of yarn. I just used the same size crochet hook that the label of my yarn called for. Or you can use a tapestry needle, it just has to have a big enough eye that the yarn can thread through it. So let's start with the tapestry needle, because I prefer weaving in ends with that. So just like with any sewing project, you'll begin by threading your needle. With yarn, it gets a little fuzzy on the end. You can either trim it, lick the end if you're into that, or twist it like this to thread your needle. And there we go. Now, what we're going to do is sew this tail into our work. So I'm going to bring it through this loop. Just make sure the loop you bring the tail through isn't the loop it's coming out of, otherwise you're going to be undoing your own knitting. So we're going to sew through this. Next, the key to good weaving in technique is to follow the trail of a piece of yarn. So this right here is naturally following this loop, so I'm going to sew behind here, following that yarn tail. And now to keep following it, we're going to go down into this loop of the cast on edge and back through the next one. So we're following along the yarn we cast on with. And we'll just keep following that. So see, this loop goes behind this V. We'll just go back there to sew through that. So just keep looking and follow the trail of the existing yarn and parallel it with your sewing. So yes, it gets a little bit thicker where you're sewing in those tails, but it's the exact same yarn, and once you have washed your finished project and even blocked it if you're at that point in your knitting, you're good to have those yarn pieces blend together. So that's working with the tapestry needle, and as you can see, at a certain point, there's not enough tail to keep sewing with the tapestry needle. So even if you prefer the tapestry needle, this is the time when we'll switch to a crochet hook to keep weaving in that end. And to weave in ends with the crochet hook, you'll still follow the trail of the yarn, but instead of sewing through it with a sewing needle, you'll work through it with a crochet hook. I'm going to turn my work upside down since I'm right-handed so I can stab through this properly. So we're going to go behind that V, catch the tail, and bring it through. And following the trail of the yarn we're following, we're going to go through this cast on bump as well. And this will be a little tight since it's the cast on edge. And if you really can't get your hook through, you can always switch to a smaller hook or be really resilient like I'm being right now and force the hook through. There we go. Catching the yarn and pulling it through. So there you go. That's how to weave in your ends with proper technique using a tapestry needle or a crochet hook.